Today I'm going to be going over all of the books that I read this year in 2024. I read a total of 72 books this year. My Goodreads goal was 100, but I definitely had a few months where I read like 1 or 2 books, so that's how it got lowered. I'm not going to go in reading order for these, and I'm also not going to give a star rating because I'm going to stop doing star ratings. I'm going to go in order of genre so that I can show you series together, things like that. So let's get into it. First books that I'm going to go over are romance series. This year I read the entirety of the Magnolia Park series. Nothing compares to these books in romance. It just doesn't. I can see why people wouldn't like these because they are very, very toxic, but at the same time you need conflict in a series. So if you're gonna be following the same characters over and over again, there has to be conflict. The first, third, and fifth book follow Magnolia and BJ. The second and fourth books follow Daisy Hates and her brother Julian, as well as Daisy Hates' love interest. If you don't like Magnolia Parks, if you don't like the first book, don't continue with the series because it will not get better to you. But they got better to me. The next romance series that I read were the Rebel Blue Ranch series by Lila Sage. First book is Done and Dusted. Then we have Swift and Saddled, and then Lost and Lassoed. I enjoyed this enough to keep picking up the series. Is it a great book? No. Is it like a good filler book for when you're reading other books? Yes, which is why I picked it up. It's very short, fast-paced. The characters in these books are not going to feel that well fleshed out. They're not going to feel like they have any depth to them whatsoever, but I think it's still fun. So if you want to pick them up, definitely pick them up, especially if you like other cowboy romances. It's very similar. I think I just feel that way about cowboy romances in general. They're just like supposed to be fun. So this book was okay. This book was okay-er. It got a little better. And then this book was so good in my opinion for what it is. Again, you're not going to get a ton of depth in these characters. I just think for picking up a cowboy romance, my expectations are always so low. And this one completely beat my expectations. I definitely will be picking up the last book. I think that book has really good potential as well. So the next like interconnected series that I picked up, I don't think this has like specific title to the series, but it's When in Rome and Practice Makes Perfect by Sarah Adams. I liked these enough to keep reading them, and I'll definitely read the third book. I definitely think that Practice Makes Perfect got better, and When in Rome was a little slow and it took a while to pick up. I think it's pretty cheesy, but I think all romances are kind of cheesy. I would recommend these. The next interconnected series I read in romance was probably my second favorite series that I picked up this year, and that's The League of Extraordinary Women. You need to read these books. You absolutely do. The first book is Bringing Down the Duke, A Rogue of One's Own, and A Portrait of a Scotsman. These ones are Regency romances. It kind of sounds ironic, but it almost adds like more of a level of respect to women. Hear me out. It's because in romances these days, you always know what the men are feeling right away into those books. I feel like when we get in their head, they're already talking about how much they love them, and it's like, okay, where's the pining? These books will have pining men. They will have men that are like holding themselves back. It adds so much more tension, and also we do have respectful men in these. These are not misogynistic, awful people, and that's what makes it so good because they're like sticking their necks out for these women that they're falling in love with, and I love it so much. I'm definitely gonna read the last book soon. I'm so excited, but I'm also very sad to be ending it because these were so good. I need to find more Regency romances. Maybe if somebody likes Bridgerton, tell me. Because I already watched the series, I don't know if I'd want to read them, but tell me if they're good. These ones are amazing. Definitely pick them up. The next romance series that I picked up was Chestnut Springs. I haven't read the last book yet. My thoughts on this series are kind of the same as the Lila Sage books. I just don't think cowboy romances are really my like bread and butter. I don't think they're like my perfect books. They're definitely books that I'll keep reading because they're really good for when you're in like a book slump or you want like a faster paced thing that you can binge really fast. I personally didn't like Flawless. I just didn't really connect to the characters. I didn't think they had that much depth. I do think Summer had a bit of depth because of her family situation. I feel like these books in general have a commonality where halfway through you kind of get the point where they're basically together, and then it really feels Hallmarky because after that you're usually dealing with the subplot. This one was a single dad trope, which I don't love, honestly. I don't like children in books. I just don't want to read about people playing with children. I think playing with children is one of the most annoying things on earth because nobody actually likes it unless it's your own kid, I guess. This book I liked the best out of the three so far. I still felt like there was this weird shift when it came to the spice where the characters did not act like themselves. There's this one, there's like the scene where it's like the scene where things progress, and I was in utter shock, like jaw on the ground. I was like, I feel like she really toes the line of, if the girl was not reciprocating or giving signs of these feelings that she was having, I would be like, that man is scary, run away. And every time I read them, I get that like gut feeling where my gut is like, oh my god, get away from him, he's terrifying, he's like, he has issues. And then every time the women like it, and I'm like, wow, okay. So if you know what scene I'm talking about, you know. The other aspects of this book were definitely better than Fearless and Heartless in my opinion. But Reckless, guys, this one was my favorite. And I honestly was dreading reading this book because if you read about Winter in the first book, you absolutely hate her. She's Summer's sister and she's just like an awful person in the first book. I do feel like there was less of like an abrupt like, oh my god, what? How'd they gain this confidence in the bedroom but they don't have it outside of it? I'm so confused. But this one was good. I liked it a lot. I think we're done with like series that I've read now. Now we're gonna go more into like authors or individual books in romance. Next like author that I read was Lynn Painter. I read Better Than the Movies and Betting on You. This book I loved so much. This perfectly encapsulated that feeling of having a crush in like high school, and it was so good. And then the next book, Betting on You, I really like this too. I do think that the main character pissed me off at points. I'm not gonna lie. Her main struggle in this book is that her mom has like a boyfriend and she really hates the boyfriend, and the boy in this book is kind of helping her get back at this boyfriend by like talking back to him or like trying to embarrass him basically. But her mom is such a sweetheart in this book that I just felt really bad for her that her kid was acting like this. And there's this one part in the book where they go, where the boyfriend plans like a little like skiing trip for them, and she's allowed to bring her friend, but her friend isn't able to go at the last minute because she was grounded, which is so YA, I love it. And then instead of telling her mom, she just brings along the guy that she likes, which I don't know if she knew at the time she liked him, but she brought a literal boy on this family trip that the boyfriend planned. And I felt so bad for the mom because she's just like, I'm gonna get back at her, I'm gonna make her want to leave the boyfriend, all these things. It's like, girl, that is so crazy. That was like my only qualm with the book. I do think again it's YA, it's not realistic and it's really juvenile and cute. So next I read Emily Henry books. First I read Book Lovers. Her writing really shines in this book in terms of her banter. It is so funny. I think the romance got like a little slower towards the end. When the resolution is so early in the book, there's only so much more you can do and I'm kind of checked out at that point, but I thought that this was a really good book. Next we have Happy Place, which sadly was a little bit of a disappointment for me. I heard a lot of people talking about how much they love this book. A lot of people, this is their favorite Emily Henry book. And I even like read this in Maine. Like I saved this book for so long to be able to read it in Maine, and I read it in Maine looking out at a lake, and I felt zero connection to these people. It was so sad. You're following these characters as they're pretending to still be together because they're on a trip with their friends in Maine that they do every year, and nobody knows that they're broken up. In books, everybody knows that like first kiss is the best part of the book. It's like the part that you're waiting for and you're so excited for when they finally just show each other that they like each other. And because we know that they've been together for 5 years, we know that the kiss that they're about to have like isn't their first kiss. It doesn't feel as like climactic, I guess. And I really wanted the past first kiss because that would make me see why they liked each other so much. It would make me feel that. And even though we were writing in a now and then perspective, we got all these important scenes in their past in the now perspective, but really like rushed through. And I was so confused why she chose to do that, because she could have just written the scene in the past perspective and given us a fully flushed, detailed scene. And it was so weird because I was looking forward to these particular things, or things that she was things that she was alluding to that she wasn't telling us what happened yet. And instead of, and me thinking the whole time like, oh, we're gonna get that scene soon. No, we would just rush over it in the now perspective. It was so strange. And because of that, I just never really connected with their romance. I also didn't really connect with their friend group, which I know a lot of people like. I didn't really care for anybody in this book, unfortunately. Maybe one day I'll reread it. Maybe it was just like right book, wrong time, even though I was literally in the perfect setting to read this. I don't know. Maybe I'll reread it one day. Next book I read was Next Door Nemesis by Alexa Martin. This book was okay. I would not recommend it per se. It was very Hallmarky, and it's about these people who join like an HOA to like compete against each other. That's like the loose premise. And it doesn't feel like super romantic, and then once they get together, I didn't really see how they got feelings for each other. It was a bit like rushed, but I liked it. It was really entertaining and I read it really fast. And if you want to read it for like a cute little read, you can definitely, I give you permission, you can do that. Next book I read was Teacher of the Year by M.A. Wardle. I got this in New York at like the romance bookshop. I'm trying to remember what it was called. I forgot what it was called, but it's like the all romance bookstore. And I'd never heard of this author before. I think this is like indie published probably. Yeah, copyright by M.A. Wardle. So if you want to pick up his books, definitely do that. It's a gay romance between a teacher, like a kindergarten teacher, and then he gets like a new student, and it's between him and his dad. I think this was a good book. I really did enjoy it. I think my biggest problem with it is it gave me like a lot of anxiety because of public places that they would choose to like kiss or something, like at a parent teacher conference. I'm like, can we not do that in a school? I don't know. It really gave me anxiety because I'm like, if somebody walks in, I'm actually gonna freak. Or like in a living room while his kid is literally sleeping upstairs. I'm like, children leave the room at night, you know that, right? So those things gave me a lot of anxiety. I do think it was like, it wasn't anything like super special, but I'm interested to pick up the rest of the books in the series. Oh, it's called The Ripped Bodice. I wrote it in the book. But yeah, I liked it and I'll keep reading these books. Next book I read was This Summer Will Be Different by Carly Fortune. I do think that this was her best book so far. I think a lot of people really like there's like this part in the book where there's like an oyster shucking competition. And I just thought that was like the least hot thing to read about somebody. I know it was supposed to add to like the atmosphere of like PEI in the summer and Canadian things, I guess. East Coast Canadian stuff. I don't know what they do there, but apparently I think that's so unattractive. I don't know. But other than that, I did really like this book. The next book that I read was 7 Years Slip by Ashley Poston. I think everybody read this year. If you haven't heard about it, it's about a girl who goes into an apartment that her aunt gave her, who just passed away. And her aunt tells her it's like this magical apartment where you can go either 7 years in the past or 7 years in the future. And one day she goes home to her apartment and she opens it and there's a man there. And then we watch them fall in love. Next book that I read was The Summer of Broken Rules by K.L. Walther. I thought this was really good. It's set in Martha's Vineyard and these people go for her cousin's wedding, I believe. The main character's sister recently passed away. And so the whole family's getting together for this wedding, and this death is like still very fresh for her. And then on the groom side of the family, I think his little brother or cousin is the boy male interest. They play like a game of assassins, which was like cool to see in like a Martha's Vineyard setting, like this whole family playing assassins. It was really cute and I liked it a lot. Now I'm on to like a section of my romance books that are books that I really didn't like and ended up decluttering. First book is Wreck the Halls by Tessa Bailey. This book I believe was about like a famous singer, and it was like a Christmas romance, and I thought that it was just really bad. I just really don't like that setting in books of like singer rock star where like she's performing on stage and we're watching. Like, I just thought that this book was really bad. I think it was like the first book I read this year because I was trying to finish it after the Christmas season, so I don't remember a ton about it, but just don't read it. Next book is Funny You Should Ask. I read Once More with Feeling the year before, and I don't know why I decided to read Funny You Should Ask. They're both so bad. They're just really bad. There was so much yapping in this book with zero chemistry, and I think the author thought she was writing chemistry, and it was just conversations, and I was like bored out of my mind. The next book I read was The Bromance Book Club. I was really excited for this series. I thought I was really gonna like it because the premise is that these men are trying to learn how to woo their women or find a woman, and they're reading romance books in order to learn how to do that. And this first book follows a male main character who's like a baseball player, and his wife like literally is like, I'm divorcing you, you're a little bitch. And then he gets roped into this club and starts reading romance books and somehow wins her back because of that. I do think the female main character in this, the reason why she left him, I think it was a bit weird. It was super strange. If you know what I'm talking about, you know. I just think that like that was a little bit on her for not communicating something. Just tell him. If you know, you know. The next book I read was The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. I really wanted to like Ali Hazelwood because so many people like her books, but guys, it was not good. It was like not good. It was so cringy. It's about a girl who starts dating a professor, and the reasons why they both need to date each other are such bad reasons. Like he thinks that it's beneficial for him to date her because he's worried that like the Board of Education wants to fire him because he seems like somebody who could just up and leave at any moment because he doesn't have anything tying him to like the university that he's working at. And he's like, oh, because I don't have like a family here, they just might think that I just want to leave and now they want to fire me for it. I'm about to be fired probably, so if we date, then they'll know that I have a reason to stay here. You think your college is not gonna fire you because you're dating a student? Thank God he's gonna stay now. What? That is so the reasons for these things were so weird. And the female main character dated him because she used to date this guy and then her friend started dating him. And her friend was like, I don't know if I should date him. Like, is it weird because you dated him? I don't want to make it weird. And she's like, no, it's not weird. Like, I don't like him at all. You can date him. And the friend is like not kissing him, not doing anything. So she's like, I'll get a boyfriend and I'll just say I have a boyfriend and stuff so that she'll be fine dating him. Your motives are so weird. They're just so weird. And then on top of that, she's like sitting on his lap in the middle of like an assembly. What? Fire him for that. I know it's not like against the rules to have relationships with students, maybe if you're a professor in that university, I guess, but for her to sit on your lap, you think, and he's like, sit on my lap so that they'll know that I have something tying me here so they won't fire me. Girl, that's gonna get you fired. I thought that was so weird. So I don't think I'll be reading Ali Hazelwood. The next book that I read was The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. The premise of this book is that the female main character's sister has a wedding and everybody gets sick at this wedding and somebody needs to go on her honeymoon apparently. So she goes and then so does the groom's brother, I believe. And so they're on this vacation and fall in love, whatever. But then towards the end, these people in this woman's family start treating her so horribly and the man is not backing her up, saying she needs to go apologize, do all these things, make it up to these other people who aren't even apologizing to the main character. I was like, you guys are so in the wrong. And not only that, but it almost felt like the authors were also like thinking that she was in the wrong. I thought that was just crazy. But next book was Icebreaker and Wildfire. I bought these books and they were on my physical TBR, which is why I read them. I wish I just bought Icebreaker so that I would know I wouldn't like Wildfire, but I bought both and so I read both of them and they were both very bad. Icebreaker was like a 1-star book, honestly. It was so incredibly pick-me with the friend group, with all these boys. I'm like, do you need attention from all of his friends as well? Like, this is so weird. Why are you doing that? And I just thought these characters had zero depth. It was really just a book written for spice, in my opinion. It was not good. And same with the second book. I still felt like there was like pick-me elements, but also there's just no depth to these characters. I felt zero connection to them. I felt really disturbed by the smut scene sometimes. You're supposed to be watching children at a camp and you're having sex in a cabin. You're a babysitter right now. What are you doing? I don't know. I thought that was weird. So that's all for the romance books. So now let's go into like the fantasy books. First series that I started and didn't finish was the ACOTAR series, and I did not like really any of them, honestly. This book was a reread for me. I read this book about 2 years ago and it was like a 0-star. Like, it was so incredibly painful for me to read. I couldn't believe how horrible the world building was. I thought the romance lacked any connection. I thought it was so awful. If you know now, you know why the romance might have seemed like it lacked connection, but I don't think that was the purpose. I think the purpose was for us to feel connected, and I didn't. I thought it just, for all the hype that it had, I just thought it was so bad. But I reread it and I realized, okay, maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought. So I picked up the next book. I loved the romance in this. It was great. It had good tension. Halfway through, when it becomes political, I just think these books are so not good at that. I think that the world building is pretty terrible. And then this book had the same problem. The beginning was fine. I think Sarah J Maas writes other scenes outside of fantasy decently well, but when it comes to the actual fantasy portions of these, I just think it's so poorly written and poorly like thought out as well. I do think that in order for a fantasy to work, you really need to have a set magic system. I really want to see Nesta's romance. I think Sarah J Maas wrote great tension for the next romances, so I'm excited to read those. I might just read half of A Court of Silver Flames or whatever it's called because I just want the romance. It's pretty bad. So another fantasy book that I read this year was The Poppy War. I just really didn't like it. It didn't hit for me. I don't think I'll be picking this up after. Kind of similar thing with like, I just didn't feel like the world building was great. Sorry. The next fantasy book that I read was Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. I will read every book that Brandon Sanderson ever writes, so this is just me getting through his backlog. I really like this book. I think it was good. I definitely can see his Brandonisms in it. I could see how it was very him, but I also could see how he's improved a lot since writing this, and I thought it was good. It was entertaining. I don't think you should start here if you read his books. Definitely start at Mistborn, but I'm glad to be getting through his backlog because I would read his grocery list, so I enjoyed this a lot. Next book I read was A Winter's Promise by Christelle Dabos. This is like a series. I think it has 4 books, and I really wanted to like this, and I didn't. I didn't think it was great. I didn't really connect. I could see how potentially there's going to be a romance here in this series that I will really like, so I am going to try out the second book, and if the second book's a flop as well, then I'll stop reading the series. But I do think that this one could have been just like a setup for the rest of the story. Not a ton happens here, honestly. I would like to see more of the magic system. It's really hard to describe what this book is about, but the magic system is based off of mirrors and like traveling through them, and our main character can do that. So I hope that there's more cool things that get to happen with that. She's also basically married off to this man, and there's not a ton of interaction with them in this book, but from what I've seen, I'm like, okay, you're giving me crumbs. I hope that it evolves, but I can't honestly really tell. So I'll read the second book this next year, but I don't know if I'll love it. So the next book I read was Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. I read this and really liked it. I thought it's not like a crazy complicated book. It's really whimsical, really magical. It makes a deal with somebody in exchange for, I think, like 3 kisses from him or something. And never a good idea to make a deal in a book. It's never good, but it ends up turning completely into a different story, and we've got a different sort of romance happening, and I loved it. I thought it was really good. I don't think it's amazing, but because I really liked this, I did have a moment where I was like, do I need to go back and read the original trilogy, which is Caraval, and the 2 books that come after that? And I realized that I do want to do that. So because I think it'll give good context to the series. I have heard that everybody likes this series a lot more than Caraval, but I do think that I could potentially get more out of this. If I read Caraval and I don't like it, then I'll just continue with this series, but I'm gonna stop this real quick, read Caraval, and then hopefully won't have to reread this. Maybe I will, maybe I'll just audiobook it, but I definitely want to finish this series. Now on to the books that I decluttered. First book I have on here is The Inheritance Games. I did not enjoy this. I didn't really connect to the characters. I didn't think like the love triangle was that great. I didn't connect with really anything. I didn't get that like satisfying part out of the mysteries and all of that I wanted to. It's like this girl is trying to solve like these clues basically to get this inheritance, and she doesn't really know why she's set up to get the inheritance, but she just plays with like these other brothers who are also playing to get the inheritance. And I just didn't think like the games that they were doing and everything were that entertaining, honestly. I know that's like an unpopular opinion. I won't be continuing the series, but I definitely want to read the Natural series. The next category will be sci-fi. I read 1 book that was sci-fi, and that was Dune, and I decluttered it. I thought this book was really bad. I'm not gonna lie to you. I thought the book was very confusing. There was like weird time jumps. The plot completely fell off towards the end. I didn't really know what was happening. The characters were not acting human-like at all, which is always really hard to relate to or connect to people when they don't behave normally. And I feel like their motives were weird. Everything was strange. Paul became into a character that I didn't really understand how he formed into that character in the book. He grew up really fast, and then he kind of lost all of his relatability, I guess, because he becomes into this like character that's like the most powerful character in their world. I didn't enjoy it. I won't be continuing the series, and I think that's for the best because people really do say that the books get worse anyways. So if we're going down from here, I'm not going along. Okay, the next genre that we'll go into is thrillers. A thriller that I read this year was The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. I do not recommend this book. I know that's not popular opinion again. I'm having a lot of unpopular opinions, I guess, today, but I really liked this book until I realized that the ending was what it was. And the reason I'm saying that is because I love thriller, I love horror, I love it in books, I love it in movies, I love it in TV shows, everything. I'm a huge fan of these things. And there's very specific things that really turn me off from this genre. If you add in a supernatural element to wrap up your story, you lost me. I think it's such a cheap way to end a book. I really do. I personally came up with an ending to this book that is a million times better and could actually happen. So I do think that really takes away from a story when I'm trying to guess in the realms of this world what is happening, and then you add in supernatural. It's like, it's so cheap to me. I think that it's so unsatisfying to end a book that way. I don't know why a lot of people like this book. It like truly ruined the whole thing for me because the whole time I was like, I think I know what's going on. This is gonna be so good. I don't mind if I guess the ending. If I guess the ending, I like it because I come up with really good endings. So I'm like, if you're thinking what I'm thinking, this is great, but this was not. So I don't recommend it. And then next, I actually read the whole Housemaid series. We have The Housemaid, The Housemaid's Secret, and The Housemaid is Watching. Just read the first book. Don't read the second and third. They just don't get better. They definitely get worse, but I really enjoyed the first Housemaid. I do think the plot twists aren't great. I think that they get found out a little too early in the story, and I think they're a little too obvious. They're hinted at, so the point where it's like a reveal, you kind of already knew, and I do think that's pretty unsatisfying. Yeah, I gathered as much because you only said it in so many ways. I listened to all of these on audiobook, and I think that's the best way to do it because it really feels like a movie, and the narrator was good, so I'd read it that way. Now on to thrillers that I listened on audio and never bought the physical copy because it's just not good enough for me to do that. First one is The Teacher by Freida McFadden. I didn't like this one. I thought it added so many plot twists in the end, like one after another. I was like, okay, you don't need to keep adding more. She was getting a little plot twist slap happy at the end there, and I just thought it was a little ridiculous. So that one, it's fine. You can read it if you want. I'll allow it. The next one that I read was The Inmate by Freida McFadden. This one I also just didn't think was great. I didn't think the plot twist was great. I think it wasn't anything special enough that I really cared what the plot twist was. I was just kind of like curious. Next one that I read was The Locked Door by Freida McFadden. This one was just like, I don't know, gruesome, but also it didn't have a great plot twist either. It's one of those things where it's like, we knew it was dark from the beginning, and so if you start out that way, I'm not really shocked when like a darker thing happens. It's like, well, it was already violent. Next one I read was The Only One Left by Riley Sager. This one was better than The House Across the Lake. It's about this woman who needs a job, and she gets a job working for this woman who lives in this house where horrible murders happen to her whole family except for her, and she doesn't speak anymore, but she starts to tell her the story of what really happened. I think it was okay. I don't think it was amazing. I think the plot twist was okay. I kind of saw it coming a little bit, so it was fine. The next one that I read was First Light Wins. Just don't read this. It was just bad. It was about like detectives, and it was just not good in my opinion. Just don't read it. It wasn't thrillery. I think it was marketed wrong for sure. Now going into horror. I wouldn't call this a thriller. I would call this horror, and that is Misery by Stephen King. I really enjoyed this book. I think that Stephen King writes characters very well. This is the first book of his that I haven't DNF'd. I actually read most of Billy Summers this year and DNF'd it. I thought it was not good. But I really liked Misery. I really liked the character of Annie. I thought she was such a well done character. The premise is that there's this author and he writes this book series, and at the end of his book series he killed a character off, and this girl Annie kidnaps him and tells him that he needs to rewrite the book with the character alive. And so he writes a whole new book while she's holding him hostage, and she's like a crazy woman, and it was really good. I really liked it. Next we have like a dark academia book. I read The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This was one of my favorite books of the year. It was so good. It's really weird. You follow really a cast of 5 characters, but you have like a main character, and he goes to this college. He applies for this class that this professor only teaches like 4 people, and he ends up getting accepted into this class, and he just discovers that they're weird and that they do weird things, and you don't really know what's going on halfway through the book even, but you slowly figure out what they're doing. I loved specifically just like the writing style in this. I just loved so much. I love when an author can tell a story in the span of a really long time. I believe this follows around like a year total, and she just does it in such a way that it flows so perfectly. The flow of this book is, it's like the author perfected like this pacing of like needing to speed up when there was unimportant times, and finding a way to not just like time jump, but describe what was happening during this time, and then be able to slow down and focus on important parts. It felt like we were like on a timeline like this, and she slowly was like taking us through this, and she's like, let's pause here real quick, and then takes us here. And then sometimes she would back up and be like, let me tell what the context was to this first, and then we would go. And it was so smooth, and I loved it so much. I do have a book that's like horror-esque classic, and that's Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This is also one that I decluttered. I am the biggest fan of the Haunting of Hill House series on Netflix. I recommend it to everybody I know. I think it's the most genius show possible. I love the time jumps. I love the characters. I love that we focus on each character in each episode. It was so good. This book is nothing like the show, and I thought it was more like it, and it's not, which even more props to Mike Flanagan, I guess. But I did not enjoy the book. I didn't think it was great. I didn't think the characters were that amazing. I could see why it's a classic, but compared to my tastes in modern day things, it didn't hit for me. Going into the classics that did hit for me, because I still own them. First, we have 1984 by George Orwell. I loved this book. This was written obviously before 1984, so the setting of this is 1984, about Big Brother. I've never seen him, but it's this person who runs the government. They completely control what you think. They control how you speak, how you act. And there's things like thought police, that if you seem to have a thought that goes against Big Brother, you could be killed for it. It's really impossible for this character to rebel against it, because he doesn't know anybody who would, because everybody acts like robots and just follows what they're supposed to be doing. And even like children will turn their parents into the police if they think that they are against Big Brother. It's pretty crazy, and it was really good. I really loved it. The next classic I have is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I really enjoyed this book. I also like to read this on a more philosophical lens, which was really the concept of playing God. It's about this doctor named Frankenstein. He creates a monster, and he creates this life, and this monster runs away. And the monster, when he goes out into society, is treated really cruelly. And we learn from the doctor, and we learn somebody close to him has died and has been murdered, and he suspects that it's the monster. And the story is really about both of them are feeling isolated. The doctor doesn't know what to do because he's being haunted by this monster who is mad at him for creating him in such a cruel world. And then you have also the monster who's completely alone, and the world hates him and people are cruel to him. It was interesting, so I liked it. The next book that I read that was a classic was Tarzan of the Apes. This obviously is the original story of Tarzan. I really liked this book. I thought it was really interesting. It's about a baby who him and his parents get stranded on this island and the parents get killed. The baby gets taken by a mother ape and that becomes his mother, and he learns to be an ape basically, and he grows up like that. This is not a realistic story, but it was really good and I really liked it. Next, into like a philosophy book that I read Candide by Voltaire. It's about this main character and he's being taught by his teacher that the world that we live in is absolute perfect world to possibly occur. And by that, he means anything that that happens in this world is the best outcome that could happen. So this main character goes and he experiences the world and sees awful, horrible things happen. And a little bit of humor is brought into it because he believes that these are all the best things that could happen. And it's him trying to explain that to people who have gone through horrible, horrible things. And it's really just the author's commentary on the flaws that could be in believing that. And I think that it's a really modern concept as well. I mean, a lot of people believe, you know, this happens for a reason, or that it's for a bigger purpose that we're not seeing. But in reality, it's a very flawed concept. So I think that was a really good book. Not to get too deep there, but I really liked it. Now, the next books I'm gonna get into are like my mystery books that I read, which are just 2 of them. And they're 2 by Agatha Christie. I read A Caribbean Mystery really early this year and it was really good. This is in the Miss Marple collection. I didn't read it in order. You don't need to read them in order. I just picked up one that I wanted to read that was shorter to see if I would like it. And I really liked it. And this book, Death on the Nile, you probably have seen like the Gal Gadot movie, but this is in the Hercule Poirot collection. And I also didn't read this in order. You don't need to. It was so good. I wrote notes on notes on notes on this book. Every page, I wrote down the page number and I wrote what the characters were doing and what was suspicious so that I could try to figure out as I went. And it was so good. I loved it so much. I was so shocked by how much I like this, and I want to read all of her books now, and I've collected a lot since. So next year will be the year of Agatha Christie for me for sure. Now going into just like literary fiction books that I read this year. First, I have The Distance Between Us by Maggie O'Farrell. I loved it 90% up into the book, and the last like 30 pages honestly ruined the book for me. I'm not gonna lie. It completely got ruined by where we took the turn, and it kind of ruined the characters for me. It's about these 2 people, and you get like 10 pages at a time of each of them, and it was really, really good. And these characters had so much depth, and towards the end, all the motivations that they had as characters, all the personality quirks about them, everything that was like good about them got completely ruined and sidetracked by this one plot that's like just really dulled them down as people, if I'm being honest. And I didn't love it. I didn't love it. But maybe I'll pick up more of her books. I know Hamnet is one of her most popular books. Maybe I'll start there so that I get reinvigorated in my want to read her books, but we'll see. Next books that I read are the best books I've ever read in my life, if I'm honest. Like, not even just this year, my life. You need to read these books. I cannot stress this enough. These absolutely changed my life. I will think about them forever and ever and ever, and I will reread them forever and ever and ever. And that is James Baldwin's books. I read Giovanni's Room, and I read If Beale Street Could Talk. Starting with If Beale Street Could Talk, this is about a story of a Black woman and living in America, in New York, and she is pregnant, and the man that she's pregnant with is in prison for a crime that he claims that he did not do, which is assaulting somebody. And you watch as the woman who is pregnant is being helped by her family, and they're all trying to find a way to get him out of prison. And you get a dual timeline where you see right now where she's communicating to him in prison and telling him about her pregnancy, and you also see her in the past when they're falling in love and what their life looked like and how beautiful it was and how simple it was, but how like special and intimate it was. And it just touched me so much, because you just feel so much pain for these people that you grow to love, and within literally 170 pages. Like, this is a short book, and James Baldwin just has a way of making you feel so much for them. Obviously, this is a picture of James Baldwin, an art piece of him, and obviously reading about a story about Black people from a Black person in America, it really pulled on my heartstrings, and I just will think about this book forever. And it's so sad to think about this being in real life and to think about the real things that people truly go through. One thing about this book that I've heard that people don't love is the ending. I won't obviously talk about what the ending is, but I will say, if you have read this book, I am the biggest fan of the ending of this book. I think it is the perfect way to show that this story wasn't about these people, but it's so much bigger than that. And it's about everybody who's experienced something like this and how change can really happen. And I thought it was so perfect, and I will not get emotional, but it was so beautiful. I cannot wait to read the rest of his books. Now on to Giovanni's Room. This one, I don't even have words for this book, honestly. It like makes me emotional just thinking about it. It's about an American named David, and he moves to France and he meets a man named Giovanni, and it's so heart-wrenching. It's in the 1950s, and both of these characters, Giovanni and David, are gay and they fall in love, but David is not openly gay. And Giovanni has a very small, quiet life with very few people because he is gay and because the society around him doesn't accept him. And so he has a very small knit group of people who wouldn't hate him, basically. And David meets these people and he falls in love with Giovanni. And oh my gosh, this book is just so incredibly heartbreaking. You have a dual timeline once again, where in the beginning of the book, you know that Giovanni is on death row. And you know that David partially blames himself for the reason why he's on death row. And you watch as he slowly falls in love with Giovanni and how he wrestles with internalized homophobia and just this fear of being openly gay because of how he knows it will change his life. And there's so many amazing quotes. I wish that I had marked them down, but I was so entranced. I was like, I need to find the quotes the second time I read this. But there was this one quote in particular where he was talking about the first time that he was intimate with a man, and he was saying that he was like looking at him while he was sleeping and he was thinking about how beautiful he looked. And then there was like a switch where he realized how much he hated the person. And he hated the person because he saw that if he loved it, that his life would be completely upended and that he would have a life of a lot of pain and a lot of people that didn't like him and a life of hardship, really. And that's when he started really resenting that man and then resenting Giovanni. And it just was the perfect explanation of like internalized homophobia and how a fear of this life and a fear of yourself could lead you to just being miserable. And James Baldwin himself is gay, and just reading about these like two profound things in James Baldwin's life of being gay and being black and seeing his stories on these, it just feels so magical that he can put such intense emotions into words and into a story in so little pages. Read these books, please. Please, please read these books. They will change your perspective on everything, and I can't wait to read the rest of his books. The next book that I have is Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Mellors. I thought that this was a decent book. I didn't think it was amazing or anything super special. You follow one girl named Cleo and a man named Frank, and they fall in love, and there's a big age gap between them, and you just watch as they have ups, downs. It's definitely not a romance. I don't know what you would classify this as, but they have a very impulsive marriage because she's from England. She gets citizenship if they get married. I would recommend it if you want, and I'll probably read the rest of her books. And then the next book I have is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. I really liked this book. It took me a long time to get through, and I do want to finish the series, but it just was very slow. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it is like an Italian translation, so it wasn't always hitting home for me or wasn't understanding the importance of certain things that I'm sure if I read it in its native language that I would. But I really liked it. It's about two young women, and you watch as they grow up. You watch from the ages of like 5 to I believe maybe like 17 of them, and the rest of the series will follow them after that. And you just watch as they grow up in Italy. Because you follow children and children's perspective, you also see their battles in their lives of jealousy, of being like, you're in this class and I want to be in that class, or these people like you and I want to be like you, and you got a boyfriend, now I want a boyfriend. But you also see the bigger picture of this place that they live in that doesn't have very many opportunities for them, and it's really good, and I would read the rest of the series for sure. Now, ones that I don't own that I did declutter are Tokyo Ueno Street. This just didn't hit for me. It is a Japanese translation, and I just think once again, the culture is just so different from anything I understand. Maybe if I had context of Japanese culture a little more, that I would have understood it. I didn't really get it, but that's not to say it's not good, because I know it objectively like is a good book to a lot of people. So if you want to read it, you can read it. I didn't understand it though, unfortunately. The next book I have is A Cowboy Christmas. I bought this book because I walked into Barnes & Noble and a man in a cowboy hat was sitting at a table and he was selling his book called The Cowboy Christmas, and I was in line and he was sitting right next to me, and I picked up his book because I wanted to have a conversation with him because it made me sad. And it made me sad to think that he might go home that night and his wife would ask him if he sold any books and he would say no. So I wanted him to at least be able to say one. So I bought it and I read it because he was really sweet and he was really nice. And if you like literary cowboy, just really flowery writing books, totally read it. I have nothing bad to say about it. Next book is Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. This is my first Sally Rooney book, and the only reason I read this first out of all her books is because I had it on my physical TBR, and obviously I decluttered it. I did not like it. I didn't think it was great. I believe that's like the general consensus of this book, is that it's not people's favorite. So read it if you want to. I found it really pretentious, honestly, like extremely pretentious. There's this relationship between these two women that are friends and they're emailing each other the most annoying bullshit possible. It's like, nobody talks to their friends like that. It was almost like Sally Rooney herself had these deep thoughts that she's like, I need the world to know I have these thoughts. And so she wrote them in emails to each other. It's like, nobody talks about that. I don't know. I thought it was weird. So now onto the very last book section that I read this year, and that is nonfiction. First book I have is 7 Principles to Making Marriage Work. Read this if you're getting married, and if you don't want to get married, read it. It has really good advice on relationships. And also it's just like by somebody who's very smart on how to maintain good relationships. And I loved it. And even if you have a best friend, read it, because this could help with that too. Next book is Gulp by Mary Roach. This is what the back of the book says that made me pick it up. It says, Roach tackles questions such as, why is crunchy food so appealing? Why is it so hard to find words for flavors and smells? How much can you eat before your stomach bursts? Can constipation kill you? Did it kill Elvis? I thought that sounded cool, and I read it, and half of the book was unfortunately about assholes and poop. So if you don't want to read about that, you don't have to. I thought it was interesting. I really like books on random facts, so I liked it. And then the last book that I have for this video is Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. So good. Let me read the back because he puts it into good words about what this is about, because it's really hard to describe. He says, in understanding successful people, we've come to focus far too much on their intelligence and ambition and personality traits. Instead, Malcolm Gladwell argues in Outliers we should look at the world that surrounds the successful, their culture, their family, their generation, and the idiosyncratic experiences of their upbringing. And that's exactly what this is about. That's a perfect way to put it. And a lot of the points that he brings up is like, there's a lot of luck to be an outlier. It also makes you think about how many opportunities that you could seize right now that would make you an outlier. Malcolm Gladwell is so cool, and you should read all of his books. If you have a fear of flying, there's like a few chapters in here that freak me the fuck out. Well, they like comforted me in some ways because it shows like what goes wrong in plane crashes, but it also made me scared of those things now. So just a warning, really specific trigger warning. Those were all 72 books I read this year. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got some recommendations or de-recommendations. Hopefully I can read 73 books next year. Bye.